So, I've said in the past that I'd like to talk about a certain topic, a comparison of two things, even though I think it's really stupid of a discussion. Now, why would I do that? Well, it's because I don't remember the last time I actually saw discussion on this, but whenever I did see discussion on this topic, that you'll know from seeing the title and thumbnail, but I'm being deliberately ambiguous about for dramatic effect. But whenever I would see discussion on this, I'd be very confused as to why it was even a question. Now, is it because the answer's so blatantly obvious that it needs not to be asked, or for a different reason? Well, the answer's a different reason. It's because I think the discussion's completely fucking stupid because, well, Tower of God and Kubera are two very different stories that serve two very different purposes. Right? They're with two different demographics. It's like comparing apples and oranges. Or, if you want a meatier example, it's like comparing Star Wars and Star Trek. They might seem pretty damn similar. They're both fantasy adventures with weird creatures and magic powers and shit. But they aren't the same. That's Kubera and Tower of God, not Star Wars and Star Trek. Again, Star Wars and Star Trek, they're both sci-fis that take place in space, but that's mainly where the similarities end. I'm sure there are more. I never was a big Star Trek watcher, but that's not the point of this video. It was just an interesting example I thought of right before I clicked record. But anyway, why am I doing a video on it? Well, I just said because I think it's dumb. Wait, no, that doesn't even make sense. Good Christ, get your words out before you try and think about what you're trying to say before you say it. Jesus. The reason I'm making a discussion on this is because I wanted to give my opinion on it. On both series, in comparison to each other, even though I just said it was dumb, and also highlight that this argument is very stupid. And just to satisfy those of you that would like an answer, watch till the end and I will give you an answer of which I prefer and think is subjectively better. So, if you are prepared for some entirely subjective bullshit, let's answer the question, which is better, Tower of God or Kubera? So obviously both stories have some similarities. We both have a main character who's relatively oblivious to who they are. Lise doesn't know that she is the daughter of this incredibly important person and that her destiny would have been incredible, and even due to the events of the story is still relatively incredible. And you have Bam, who is the son of Arlene and V, and then has no idea about it, was living in this fucking weird cave place, and then ended up in the tower, and had no fucking idea what the hell the tower was or what was going on in it. Had no idea how powerful he was, had no idea about his abilities or his destiny. Similar start, relatively similar main characters in that regard. It's from here that everything is fucking different, however. That's where the similarities between Bam and Lise really end. Lise is a very, very tragic protagonist, whereas Bam is your more shonen-esque protagonist. He does have his, angsty arc, but I wouldn't really call that tragic, although he does go through some shit, due to Rachel, that's going through shit from his point of view. But, comparing suffering is a weird thing, but I think Lise goes through a bit more, trauma in her life, especially during the story, compared to Bam. Right? So they both have kind of a thing, but like a sad bit going on. But Bam's is more of an angsty phase, whereas Lisa's is she's just suffering and being treated like utter garbage. So again, they're not really similar there. And like I said, these two characters, and at the end, again, Bam is, this shonen protagonist who's, supposed to, shonen-esque protagonist, he's getting stronger, he's becoming more powerful, he's massively outscaling those around him that he, journeyed with to begin with. Power scaling, shonen nonsense, it is what it is. Whereas Lise, while she's strong, she herself isn't all that more powerful than, regular people. She's not particularly great with magic. She has some potential, and she has some nice items that help her out. But she's not, exceptional by any standards, at least in the story. She very well could have been, but if you've read it, which you definitely should, by the way, and you should read Tower of God too, they're both very, very good, you'll know why. As for the rest of the world around them, well, that's also entirely different. Yes, they're fantasy settings, they're both fantasy adventures, with Tower of God, both actually having a relatively strong mystery element very early on, whereas Kubera maintains that mystery element, I'd say, going through, whereas Tower of God, it becomes more of a side thing in favor of shonen battle stuff, whereas Kubera, the mystery, the drama, and, this is going to sound worse than it is, but the plot is more Kubera's strong suit, whereas Tower of God is, your fight choreography, your cool-ass panels, the visual flair. Whereas early on, I actually do think Tower of God was very story-focused. This mystery element in early Tower of God is somewhat comparable to Kubera's mystery element with its drama, but I do think, again, they serve two different purposes. These two stories are not the same. They're not really serving the same purpose, and comparing them isn't really fair or reasonable. As for which has better writing, entirely subjective. Obviously, what you think is good writing, I mean, there are certain things that are just objectively good writing, but what you think is good writing differs from person to person. I think Kubera has incredibly good writing. I think Tower of God has had some incredibly good writing, and has, taken a different direction. Is the writing bad? No, it's just a different direction from what really got me hooked on the story in the beginning, although I still love it. And in Kubera's case, the thing that's hooked me has stayed through, so you could argue that perhaps Kubera is better written because it's stuck true to this one thing throughout the whole time. But again, flexibility in a story could possibly be a benefit or a good thing to somebody else. And that's not to say Kubera doesn't have really good action and some really good art, especially in Season 3. But you know what I'm trying to say. At least I hope you do. If not, comments, ask me and I'll try and explain in more detail when I can think more concisely. Because this isn't scripted, I'm just spouting nonsense into a fucking microphone. As I tend to do in these Wednesday videos, it's just some either hit or miss chaos. If you like this type of stuff, hit the sub button, it'd be really appreciated. Also, go check out my other stuff. I like to voice act, I read webtoons and manga. You probably like it. Because there's also Omniscient Reads Viewpoint that I read. Probably bring that into a different discussion. In fact, there's a series that I'd like to compare it to as well, actually. In a similar vein to this, where it's two kind of similar stories with similar elements that are very, very different. If you know what I'd compare it to, leave a comment. If you guess right, I'll give you a cookie. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And the end goals of these series, I'd say, is also different as well, in terms of the writing. Obviously, as I've mentioned it a handful of times, there's also the visual element. I've not read Season 1 of Tower of God, but I've seen some panels, and yeah, the art isn't fantastic. But it's way better than most people who claim the art is bad could produce. Same with Kubera. I've seen people say Kubera has bad art. Hell, there's a comment on one of my videos talking about Kubera that calls it a boring chick flick manhwa with bad art, and because I've never responded to that comment, it sits there in my YouTube studio whenever I tab into it, taunting me. Yeah, that comment lingers. That comment lives rent-free in my head, unironically. Maybe acknowledging it now will finally make it fade away. But yeah, and again, same with Kubera. I think the early art in Kubera, while it's not the best, is still pretty damn good. And it does the job for what it needs to do. It does the job for portraying the story. However, which one do I think has better art? Well, I think modern Tower of God has some unbelievably good panels. I do think Tower of God surpasses Kubera in the art department and the fight choreography department. That's just me, but hey, you can disagree. I also prefer, and this is actually more this is actually more of the structure of the webtoons themselves, and that is, well, how panels are laid out and how the focus shifts. Although focus shifts are actually a story segment. If you've studied English at any level, you'll know this. But Kubera focuses on one thing concisely, and then gets you interested in something else, and then right when you really want to know, it feeds it to you. It gives it to you right when you need to know what it's been hinting at. It doesn't shift focus constantly between different places like Tower of God does do from time to time in things like The Nest, especially. Like, the jumping of perspectives, I think, is slightly detrimental to Tower of God's direction, I think, in my opinion. I will just say that now. Whereas Kubera is a lot more focused and it doesn't tend to leap around. And also that's same with the arc structure as well. Tower of God, especially in Season 3, the arcs are sporadic. They're constantly, there's loads of different arcs with different titles and it's constantly changing. Whereas in Kubera, you have these very concise, relatively long blocks that are, yes, this is what's going on, this is this arc, and then it moves on, and the arcs are all interjoined, interlinking, and yes, the same thing applies for Tower of God, again, but I think there's just too many, it feels wrong to call them arcs, you know what I mean, because some of them are like 3 chapters long, or like, so in some cases, we're only like 1, it's like, this is like, something on this floor, 1, and then the next chapter is just something, now it's a new arc. I'm like, was that needed? Did you really need a title change for that, or could this have been more concisely compiled? Possibly. Again, more stylistic directing choices, if you will, in that regard, that I think Kubera does a bit better than Tower of God does. So, I think I've given my thoughts on these series in comparison to each other like this pretty well, in my opinion. I think I've done it enough to get across what I'm trying to say. These 2 stories do things very differently. As I said at the beginning, they serve different purposes, for different people. Different stories, different focuses. Different genres, even. Kubera is a lot more drama-focused. Tower of God is less so. Tower of God's more action-focused. Not to say that they both don't have those things, it's just their focuses are different. I don't think comparing these 2 series is entirely fair. Because, again, I will sound like a broken record at this point, but they serve different purposes for different people and are 2 different stories. Which do I think is, in my opinion, my preferred choice? Well, I've said this in the 500 sub Q&A special, and I prefer Kubera. Right now, Kubera has me so unbelievably hooked, it is to be untrue. Does that mean I think Tower of God is bad or a worse story? No. I just right now prefer Kubera. So if I were to rank them, out of the 2, Kubera would be number 1, with Tower of God in number 2, out of all of these options, right? So yes, I guess you could say that means I'm saying Kubera is better. However, has that always been the case? No. And will it always be the case? Who the fuck knows? Again, it's all subjective. If you like one more than the other, that's fine. You don't need to get into a keyboard war over it. Because at the end of the day, it don't fucking matter. Because again, the upteenth time, these are 2 different stories, entirely, with a few similarities here and there. But at the end of the day, they're like apples and oranges. Just because they both fruit, don't mean they're the same. You can make juice out of them both. And hell, if that analogy carries, I'd love to see a Kubera anime. But yes, tell me your thoughts on this discussion, which you prefer. If you really do think one is objectively better than the other, you can drop that there as well. Comment on my thoughts if you think my appraisal and my stance on this is incorrect or flawed in any degree or any way. And with that, I've been Animosity, you've been you, and I hope to catch you all next time for another video. Ta-ta. For now.